The cosmos does not know the concept of silence, not in the way a mortal mind comprehends it. For what is silence but the absence of a sound that was, or could be, in the true, abyssal dark between the galaxies? There is no absence, only a presence. It is the deep, resonant hum of space-time itself, the gravitational lullaby of slumbering black holes, the faint, ghostly hiss of radiation left over from a creation event so violent and so distant that its echoes have been stretched into near nothingness. This is the void's own music, a symphony of immense, unthinking pressures and vast, patient emptiness. It is a darkness that is not merely the lack of light, but a substance in its own right. It is a velvet woven from the threads of quantum foam, a cold that is not a temperature but a state of perfect, unshakable equilibrium. In this theater of infinities, stars are not warm and hopeful beacons. They are pinpricks of furious, temporary fire, raging against a tide of entropy that will inevitably, inexorably reclaim them. They are momentary sparks struck from the great dark flint of existence, and their light travels for eons across chasms of such profound emptiness that the very concept of a journey becomes meaningless. On one particular night, as the Earth tilted on its axis with the slow, grinding patience of geological time, this cosmic presence seemed to press closer. It was as if the fabric of the void had thinned, its texture becoming palpable. In a remote, mist-choked valley, cradled between the granite knuckles of an ancient mountain range, lay the village of Aethelburg. The darkness here felt different from the simple terrestrial night. It was an imported darkness, a sample of the intergalactic chasm. The air, usually thick with the scent of damp earth, pine resin, and wood smoke, was now unnervingly sterile, carrying a faint metallic tang like the air after a lightning strike, but without the preceding flash or thunder. The sounds of the living world were being systematically muted. The frantic chirping of crickets had dwindled to a few sporadic clicks before ceasing altogether. The hoot of a hunting owl, which should have echoed from the high pines, was swallowed the moment it left the bird's beak, a note consumed by an impossibly perfect soundproofing. The gurgle of the stream that bisected the village, the lifeblood of Aethelburg for centuries, seemed to lose its voice, its murmur becoming a thin, reedy whisper, as if it were afraid to disturb a slumbering titan. Even the wind, which should have soughed through the thatched roofs and rattled the ill-fitting shutters, was still, not calm, but held. It was the held breath of a predator, a tension so absolute it felt like a physical weight upon the land. The world was a bell waiting for a strike that would not shatter it, but unmake it. This was not the peace of a sleeping village, but the profound, expectant stillness of a tomb before it has been sealed. Before the word, there was the thought. Before the light, there was the potential for it. And before both, there was the canvas upon which they would be painted the unthing, the great is not, the infinite potential of null. This was not an evil, for evil is a choice, an action. This was a state of being, or rather, a state of non-being, a foundational axiom of reality. When the first vibration of existence, the great song, erupted and began weaving the tapestry of matter, energy, time, and space, this primordial state did not vanish. It remained. It was the silence between the notes of the song, the unlit space between the stars. It was the shadow that gave light its definition. Philosophers and mystics across countless worlds and forgotten eons had brushed against its nature, giving it names: the locus of quiescence, the sibilant void, the unmover. They sensed it not as a destructive force, but as a corrective one, a force of supreme balance. The song created stories, complexities, lives filled with love and hate, triumph and failure, unstable, chaotic energies that flared and died. The void, in its patient eternity, did not seek to end these stories, it sought to collect them. It was a hunger not for flesh or spirit, but for narrative, for the static, unchanging perfection of a moment sealed in amber. It craved the potential energy of a life, the hopes, the fears, the memories, the choices not taken. And its method of collection was to lift that life, that story, out of the chaotic flow of time and into its own timeless, silent archive. For this entity, existence was a library, and life was the frantic, messy, and ultimately temporary scrawling of tales onto its pages. The void was the archivist who, seeing a page filled with a particularly vibrant or complete narrative, would carefully excise it, preserving it forever from the ravages of the future, from the fading of memory and the decay of matter. The act was not one of malice, but of an alien, incomprehensible form of love, the love of a collector for a perfect specimen. The planet Earth, a mote of dust in an unremarkable galaxy, had spun for billions of years largely beneath the void's notice. Its stories were fledgling, its complexities nascent, but there were places on its surface where the veil between the music of reality and the silence of the void was thin. These were often places of great age, where the planet's own geologic and magnetic energies created a resonance, a sympathetic hum that the void could perceive. Aethelburg was one such place. It was built unknowingly within a ring of lichen-spotted megaliths, standing stones erected by a people so ancient their names were not even dust. These stones were not markers or temples, they were tuning forks driven into the earth to resonate with the world's deep telluric currents. And on this night, a celestial alignment not seen in 70 millennia, a precise conjunction of distant pulsars and gravitational lenses caused the orrery of worlds to turn in just such a way that the hum of the Aethelburg stones became a clear, piercing note, a beacon singing directly into the silent dark. The great, unthinking consciousness of the void turned its gaze, a gaze that was not seeing but a form of listening, and it heard the intricate, tightly woven story of Aethelburg's 700 lives, intertwined, rich with history, tradition, and the quiet, potent drama of human existence. It heard a complete tale, a finished chapter, and the archivist decided it was time to add it to the collection. The day had been unremarkable, yet threaded with a subtle, pervasive wrongness that the villagers of Aethelburg felt in their bones but could not name. It was a discordance in the rhythm of their lives, a skipped beat in the heart of the world. KL, the woodsman, had felt it first. As dusk bled its deep plum and bruised orange hues across the western peaks, he stood at the edge of the ancient woods, axe resting on his shoulder. The forest, usually a cacophony of life settling down for the night, was utterly still. Not a single bird offered its evensong. The rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth was gone. The very air felt thin and brittle, as if it might shatter. He looked at the trees, their familiar shapes dark against the fading light, and for the first time in his life, they did not feel like a sanctuary, but like the bars of a cage. A primal fear, cold and slick, coiled in his gut, the fear of being watched not by a predator with eyes, but by the vast, indifferent emptiness of the sky itself. He hurried back to the village, the silence of the woods chasing his heels like a phantom wolf. Inside her cottage, where the scent of drying herbs hung heavy in the air, Elara the weaver sat at her loom. Her fingers, usually so deft and sure, fumbled with the threads. The colors seemed to mock her. The deep madder red she was weaving into a shroud for Old Man Hemlock's eventual passing looked faded and gray in the flickering lamplight. The rich indigo felt leached of its vibrancy, the color of a dead sky after the moon has set. It was more than a trick of the light. She felt a strange vibration humming up from the packed earth floor, through the legs of the loom and into the marrow of her bones. It was a note so low and persistent that it was less a sound and more a feeling, a deep thrumming that resonated with the hollow spaces in her body. She paused, her hands hovering over the half-finished pattern, and felt a profound sense of futility. What was the point of weaving a story into cloth when the world itself felt as if it were unraveling? Old Man Hemlock himself sat by his hearth, the fire burning with an unnatural pallor. The flames, usually a riot of orange and yellow, were tinged with a sickly violet edge, and they seemed to give off more light than heat. A deep, unshakable chill had settled into him, a cold that had nothing to do with the night air. He grumbled to himself, dismissing the nervous energy in the village as peasant superstition, the result of a strange fog or an ill wind. Yet, as he tried to summon a memory of his wife, her face young and laughing in the sun, the image was hazy, distant. It felt less like his own memory and more like a story he had once been told about a stranger. The rich tapestry of his 90 years felt thin and threadbare, the colors fading before his very eyes. The connections that bound him to his own past were growing slack, and this, more than any nocturnal silence or strange-colored fire, terrified him. Throughout the village, the tension manifested in 1,000 small ways. In the tavern, the Gilded Stag, the usual boisterous laughter and singing was replaced by muted conversations and the clink of mugs that sounded unnaturally loud in the encroaching quiet. Men and women drank, but the ale did not warm them. Families gathered for their evening meal, the familiar ritual of breaking bread feeling alien and strange. Mothers held their children a little tighter, humming lullabies that died in their throats, the tunes forgotten halfway through. The village dogs, usually a chorus of barks and whines, lay silent in the alleyways, their muzzles tucked beneath their paws, shivering not from cold but from a palpable dread. The shadows cast by the oil lamps were wrong. They were too dark, too sharp, and they seemed to cling to the walls and floors, not as absences of light, but as pools of something thick and substantial, drinking the warmth and life from the very air. The 700 souls of Aethelburg were together, yet each felt utterly, terrifyingly alone, adrift on a silent sea. The moment of transition was not announced by a thunderclap or a blinding light. It was marked by the absence of a sound. From the small stone chapel at the heart of the village, the Vespers bell began to toll its customary 9 chimes. 1. A deep bronze note that rolled through the valley. 2. 3. Each peal was flatter, deader than the last. 8. The sound was thin, a mere whisper of its former self. And then, nothing. The 9th chime never arrived. The sound was not cut short. It was consumed in the instant of its creation, swallowed whole by a silence that was no longer passive but had become an active, hungry presence. With the unsound of the final bell, the world shifted. It began not as a physical change, but as a perceptual one. The warm yellow glow of the hundreds of oil lamps and tallow candles throughout Aethelburg began to warp. The light seemed to thicken, to become viscous, stretching like spun sugar. It no longer illuminated surfaces, but seemed to coat them in a syrupy, languid luminescence. From the periphery of every villager's vision, color began to bleed away. The rich brown of a wooden table, the earthy green of a bowl of stew, the faded blue of a woman's shawl, they all desaturated, fading to shades of gray as if the world were a watercolor painting being bled dry. This monochrome reality held for a moment, a perfect, still photograph of a village at dinner, and then it inverted, flipping into a stark, terrifying negative. The pale flames of the lamps became cores of absolute blackness, radiating a visible, shimmering darkness. The shadows they cast were now searingly white, a light with no source and no heat. Then came the dissolution of sound. The low, bone-deep hum that had plagued Alara and the others intensified, rising in pitch until it became a single, pervasive, sibilant whisper. It was the sound of sand pouring through an infinite hourglass, the hiss of a dying star, the collective, indrawn breath of a void. It was not heard with the ears, but with the soul. All other noises folded into it. A man's call to his wife became a puff of silent vapor. The clatter of a dropped spoon was a ghost of emotion, its impact utterly soundless. The crackle of the hearth fires, the cry of a startled infant, the scraping of a chair roll were rendered moot, their vibrations absorbed into the sibilance that was now the only truth. And then, the people. It was not an agony, it was not a death, it was an unraveling. For each of the 700 souls, the process began within the landscape of their own consciousness. Their sense of self, the I that was the anchor of their being, began to fray. Old Man Hemlock experienced his entire 90-year life not as a sequence, but as a single, simultaneous moment. Every joy, every sorrow, every love, every loss, all compressed into a single, overwhelming sensation that then simply dissolved like a salt crystal in water. His identity, the sum of his experiences, was being catalogued, copied, and filed away. In her cottage, Alara watched in her mind's eye as the threads of her half-finished tapestry untangled themselves, the colors she had so carefully woven separating back into their constituent parts, then fading into nothing. She was no longer Alara the weaver. She was a collection of atoms, a vessel of fading memories, a witness to her own unmaking. She felt no fear, only a profound, crystalline clarity, the understanding of a specimen being prepared for display. Kale, the strong woodsman, felt the strength drained from his limbs not as weakness, but as a gentle loosening. The calluses on his hands, a testament to a life of hard labor, smoothed away. The firm boundary between his skin and the air in his cottage blurred. He looked at his hand and saw the flickering lamplighter, its dark negative through his own flesh. He was becoming translucent, a figure of smoke and memory. Maeve, a young mother, was holding her sleeping child in her arms, rocking gently in a chair by the fire. As the change took hold, her fear for her child was the last thing to go. It was a fierce, pure emotion, a final flare of the song of life. Then it too was archived. She and the child did not separate. Their forms flowed together, their outlines blurring into a single, shimmering column of pearlescent, silent energy. For a heartbeat, they were a statue carved from mist and starlight, a perfect peat of maternal love, before they too were winked out of existence. Across the village, the scene replayed itself 700 times. A man lifting a piece of bread to his lips became a shimmering ghost in mid-motion, and when his form dissipated entirely, the bread fell silently back onto the plate. A woman, halfway up the stairs to bed, simply ceased to be there, one foot hovering over a step that would never be taken. They were not ripped from the world, they were meticulously, delicately excised from it. The whispering absence was not a butcher. It was a surgeon of impossible skill, separating the story from the page without tearing the paper. The final human pattern, the last echo of life, was absorbed. The sibilant whisper that had filled all space receded, pulling back into itself until it vanished completely. And what it left behind was a silence so absolute, so profound, that it was a physical pressure against the eardrums of a non-existent listener. It was the sound of a vacuum made manifest, a perfect and eternal null. The wound in the fabric of reality, the small incision through which the void had reached, sealed itself as if it had never been. From a cosmic perspective, the orrery of worlds continued its silent, indifferent ballet. The light from a distant supernova, which had been on its way to Aethelburg for 1,000 years, would arrive and find nothing to illuminate but stone, thatch, and dust. The universe did not register the loss. A single note in an infinite symphony had been muted, and the music played on, heedless. But in the valley, the change was total. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of impossible stillness. In every one of the village's cottages, the lamps still burned. Their dark negative flames cast their sterile white shadows across scenes of interrupted life. A bowl of stew, still steaming, sat on a table, a spoon resting beside it. An ale-jack, overturned in a tavern, had left a dark, wet stain on the wooden floorboards, a stain that would now never dry. In a child's room, a wooden soldier lay on its side, felled in a forgotten, imaginary war. The imprint of a head remained on a pillow, the sheets still holding the faint, residual warmth of a body that was no longer matter. The very air of Aethelburg had been altered. It was thin, cold, and sharp in the throat of any living thing that might have tried to breathe it. It smelled of ancient dust, of ozone, and of the inside of a sealed stone vault. The mist that clung to the valley floor was no longer mere water vapor. It was a residue, a faint ectoplasmic remnant of the void's presence. It did not swirl or drift in the non-existent breeze. It lay in heavy, motionless banks, glowing with a faint internal phosphorescence under the cold starlight. The laws of simple physics felt suggested, rather than enforced. A single leaf, dislodged from the eaves of the chapel, did not flutter to the ground. It fell in a straight, slow, perfectly vertical line, as if in a vacuum, landing on the cobblestones with a silence that was absolute. The world had become a museum exhibit, the village at eventide, sealed behind a pane of glass so thick and so clear that it was invisible. Every object was an artifact, every half-finished meal a testament. The story had been taken, but the stage set was left behind, pristine and eternal. As days bled into weeks, and weeks into seasons, the ripple effects of Aethelburg's excision began to propagate outwards, not through space, but through concept and memory. The natural world, which should have moved in to reclaim the empty village, recoiled from it. No birds flew over the valley, no deer or wolves dared to cross its unseen threshold. The grass and weeds that tried to grow in the untended lanes were a pale, ghostly gray, and they crumbled to dust at the slightest touch. The mighty oaks and pines at the valley's edge began to wither, their leaves falling away to reveal stark, skeletal branches, as if the very concept of life could not hold in such close proximity to the scar. The change was most insidious in the minds of men. In the neighboring hamlets and towns, the memory of Aethelburg began to fray. At first, merchants would complain that the road to the valley seemed longer than they remembered. Then they found the path had vanished entirely, overgrown with the same gray, lifeless vegetation. Soon they could no longer clearly recall the name of the village, referring to it only as that place in the mountains. Within a generation, even this vague recollection was gone. The name Aethelburg was erased from maps, from ledgers, from the collective consciousness of the region. It became a ghost of a memory, a story that was never told because no one could remember its beginning. The void was not content to simply take the villagers, it was now meticulously erasing every trace that they had ever been, cleaning the page for a new story to be written elsewhere. This raised a chilling philosophical paradox. Was this an act of ultimate destruction, or of a bizarre, alien form of preservation? The 700 souls of Aethelburg were not dead. Death is an end, a decay, a return to the chaotic churn of the universe. They had been lifted out of that cycle. Their lives, their stories, their loves and fears were now perfect, unchanging, and eternal, held forever in the silent, timeless archive of the void. They were a finished work of art, removed from the grubby, chaotic studio of reality and hung in a gallery of infinite silence. Had they been granted a form of immortality, or subjected to a damnation so complete that it erased their very existence from the memory of the world they had left? The question hung in the sterile air of the valley, a silent testament to an event that, according to the slowly altering records of humankind, had never happened at all. Centuries dissolve like mist. Empires rise and crumble into dust. Languages are born, evolve, and die. The world turns, and the memory of what transpired in that silent, mist-choked valley is buried under layers of new stories, new lives, new songs. Yet, the scar remains. A place that is not a place, a valley that appears on no map, a hollow in the world where the song of creation is muted and thin. In a vast, climate-controlled archive, a scholar of antiquities pores over a newly discovered fragment of a 9th century tax census, its brittle vellum smelling of dust and ages. His optical enhancers scan the faint, spidery script translating the archaic tongue. He finds an anomaly, a single-line item that doesn't correlate with any known settlement of the period. Aethelburg, 703 souls. Tax paid in wool and iron. It is a ghost in the machine of history, a data point with no context. Intrigued, he dedicates years to this phantom village, cross-referencing, searching for any other mention. He finds none. It is as if the village and its 700 people existed for one fleeting moment on a single piece of parchment and then ceased to be. Driven by an obsession he cannot explain, he uses cartographic algorithms to triangulate the probable location based on the forgotten trade routes mentioned in the census. He travels to the ancient mountain range and finds a valley, a place the